Good evening, you're watching Trending at 10 p.m. I'm Vishnu Shom. On 9/11, September the 11th, 4 Air India pilots on board Air India's flagship flight from Delhi to New York faced one of the most dangerous situations imaginable. They were low on fuel with multiple systems failing in their Boeing 777 aircraft. With zero visibility over the New York area, it was proving to be impossible to spot the runway. There were 370 people on board. On this NDTV exclusive, for the first time, the senior commanders on the flight break their silence and explain just how bad the situation was when they somehow managed to land in Newark, an alternate airport. Now, for those into aviation like me, the interview you will see in a few minutes is filmed inside an Air India Dreamliner simulator. The 777 simulator wasn't available yesterday when I filmed this interview, but what the pilots say and what they demonstrate will give you a good idea of just how close it was. The heroes of the flight, Captain Rustam Palia, Captain Sushant Singh, they were the senior commanders, and Captain Vikas and DS Bhatti, the first officers. But first, here is the actual conversation between the pilots and air traffic control soon after they first missed their approach to land at New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport. You can hear the pilots discussing the weather over New York and how bad their fuel situation on board was.
Okay, the other thing that we could try over here, because we've got a trend showing it's the ceiling at JFK is also improving a bit. I could try a VNAV approach, a quick VNAV approach over here.
Okay.
And see, it can take us down in a situation like this because we're really, stuck and there's no fuel.
Now, with an approach into JFK not possible, the pilots decided to land at their alternate airport, Newark. But the weather here was bad as well. There were low clouds, and the instrument landing system of the jet, which allows the 777 to land in bad weather conditions, was non-operational. The pilots would need to land the highly automated AI-101 the old-fashioned way.
Okay, so you want to do the VNAV approach into Newark, is that correct?
That's right. That's the only option that we have because, this ILS is unpredictable because every time we turn towards the localizer, it's just gone.
Okay, so your ILS is out of service on both sides of the airplane, right?
That's correct.
And then you said also the radar altimeters are out on both sides of the airplane?
That's right. We are on a single radio altimeter now.
Okay, so you just have the basic altimeter?
Yes.
Well, in this clip, the pilots outline what else failed on the aircraft. The key point to remember is this: modern aircraft like the Boeing 777-300 being flown by Air India have multiple backup systems. On this jetliner, system after system went down inexplicably. The pilots had to make do with very little on board that was working.
Air India 101, other than both ILSs, both radar altimeters, what other things have failed on the airplane?
Basically, here we've got single source radio altimeter. We've got TCAS failure, no auto land, wind shear system, auto speed brake, and APU is unserviceable as well.
So as they get set to approach Newark Airport, Air Traffic Control asks the pilots for the number of souls on board. Now, emergency services need this detail to deal with any eventuality.
Okay, Air India 101. So just when you get a chance, give me the people on board and the fuel on board, please.
We have total of 370 and fuel, 7,200 kgs, right there, 101.
Finally, as the pilots gets ready to shoot an approach to land at Newark in poor weather conditions and with little fuel on board, the air traffic controller and the pilots have this brief exchange.
Air India 101, is there anything else that you need from me?
We are good, sir. Thank you for the support. And thank you very much.
No, you're welcome. I wish there was more I could do for you.
I'm at the Air India operational headquarters in front of an Air India simulator to meet for the first time the two pilots of AI-101, the flagship flight of the airline between New Delhi and New York, which encountered a serious incident as it approached John F. Kennedy International Airport. We're going to be talking to the two pilots as we enter the simulator to get an idea of some of the problems which they faced on the 11th of September, just a couple of days back. Now, in short, the two pilots were facing a fairly serious situation when there was fuel which was a concern, weather which was a concern, and they needed to land the plane with hundreds of passengers on board. We are very privileged to speak to the two pilots over there. Two of the four pilots, I should mention, the two who are joining us are the senior commanders on that very long 15-hour plus flight from India to the United States, Captain Rustam Palia and Captain Sushant Singh. Thanks very much for speaking to us. It's great to be speaking to you because we read all about, that September 11th flight and how much of a challenge it was. Now, the landing period of the flight, the final period, there was bad weather, fuel was a concern, and you had to land in your diversionary airport, which was Newark. What were some of the big challenges for you at that stage?
Okay, like you mentioned earlier, the basic problem was the weather, that where we needed instrumentation to be able to land in the weather conditions that were prevailing at that time. So the fuel was another concern because after a 15-hour flight like this, we have just basically enough fuel to go to our alternate, which was Newark in this case. So since the weather, the cloud base was a little better in Newark, we decided to divert there and attempt a non-precision approach with the basically the remaining instrumentation that we had at our disposal.
Okay, and so Captain, just for the benefit of our viewers, what were the systems which had failed on board which made this landing particularly challenging?
In fact, as Captain Rustam Palia rightly put it, when we were coming down for the approach, we had multiple failures one by one, which started with the radio altimeters failure. We have three radio altimeters on board, and two of them failed. And the third one was giving an erroneous indication to all the instruments, and because of that, we lost out instrument landing system, which is the precision approach, which helps us in bad visibility and bad weather to bring down the aircraft and safely land, which was not available. And in this case, in New York, JFK, the weather was pretty bad. The cloud ceiling was very low, that is the cloud height. And because of that, we couldn't have gone down further to side the runway. And that's where Captain Rustam Palia very rightly took a decision to initiate a go-round. We all, four of us, among us, we tried to sort out the matter, what exactly is happening, because one by one things were failing and we had all the warnings happening. And that was creating a lot of clutter and confusion. So we wanted to come back, take our own sweet time and sort out the matter before we conduct another approach.
Right.
And we did ask New York if we can do another approach, but they said that no, the weather is not improving, and so was none of the airports around.
Right.
So this is the time when I think all four of us decided there's no another day, we have to do it another way.
Okay.
There's a song by Pink Floyd, Emily Play, and I think that's where it worked. We tried to do something else, something different,
Yep.
and it worked out well.
So, in simple terms, what you were facing over here was zero visibility because of low clouds. You'd flown for 15 plus hours, so fuel was restricted. You had multiple systems failures on board, which is why landing would have been very, very challenging. And at that situation, you needed to have taken a decision. Why did you take that decision as opposed to, say, flying to another airfield where visibility was better? Tell us about the process of taking a decision.
Okay, so since we had limited fuel, we possibly could have reached an airport which again had just marginally better weather conditions than what was prevailing in JFK. So by the time we reached there, and we have virtually hardly any fuel to conduct an approach. The idea was basically to keep as much fuel with us where we could attempt multiple approaches, because we didn't know when we break out of the clouds where we are going to be. We're going to be to the right of the runway, to the left of the runway. We'd have to adjust our flight trajectory to be able to land. So since miraculously the cloud base improved
A bit, a shade.
marginally.
A shade,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
that's where
From 200,
we decided.
it was basically from 200 feet, it's gone to 400 feet.
Yeah.
That was a glimmer of hope there. That if we can see the runway at 400 feet, it gives us a better chance to align the aircraft and
Sure.
make a successful landing.
And Rustom, you were telling me something very interesting earlier on, that when you finally spotted the runway and you were at a speed of close to 300 odd kilometers per hour, you were not perfectly aligned to the runway. You didn't have very much fuel. You didn't really want to use that opportunity of going around. You needed to land. So you had to quickly adjust the aircraft, right?
That's correct. When we broke out of the clouds at 400 feet, what we see before we actually spot the runway, we see the approach lights. So the approach lights were offset to the left of our flight path. So the adjustment had to be made to, turn to the left and continue descending. Also, we were slightly high on that approach because this was a non-precision approach. So basically, in a non-precision approach, it brings you close to the runway vicinity, but you should have the visibility to be able to adjust the aircraft. Here, the visibility was very limited since the cloud base was so low and we broke out at 400 feet. The adjustment was done and the landing was carried out.
Such big planes, when they're landing, we need to get the call-outs, we need to get the warnings, at what height are we descending to, because it's a big plane, there's a lot of inertia happening. And that's where I guess our training car came very handy, and we had to do all that without any kind of automated call-outs and automated help.
Yep.
And we had to basically turn back to the basic flying techniques, which we learned from our flying clubs and the training department all these years, and I think it all worked out very well in the end.
Yeah. And something interesting which you mentioned, after you landed and you shut down, there was a massive downpour. Now, if that downpour had happened about 15 minutes back, it would have made your already difficult landing even more difficult.
Yeah, I think if that had happened when we broke out of the clouds, it would have been virtually impossible to land because it was such a heavy downpour. If we break out of the clouds at 400 feet, we are going to see nothing. And we'd have to execute another missed approach. We'd be using up a lot of fuel. And then the scenario would get even more critical because then if you're landing on a wet runway, you've got, limited braking and further complications.
And the story might have been different.
I'm sure the story would have been same. We've got faith in all of you flying these aircraft. Now, instrument landing systems, again for the benefit of a larger audience. How are modern aircraft like the 777 very heavily instrumented, very heavily automated, that makes the process of landing much easier? What does instrument landing actually do, and without it, how is it more challenging?
The instrument landing system for the common man, non-aviators, it's basically an instrument which helps us in aligning our aircraft to the center line of the runway horizontally as well as vertically, putting down on the path so that we can descend very comfortably and we can land in a limited distance given to us on the runways, because these aircrafts are very big and they eat up a lot of runway, so we can't afford to lose out the length of the runway. So this is the basically the instrument which really helps us in precisely putting down the aircraft on the runway.
Yeah. And so the instrument landing system wasn't working. However, you needed to use whatever else you had on board the aircraft to simulate an instrument landing system. What did you do?
Yeah, that's correct. So basically we have another system on board that we use, which is called LNAV, which is lateral navigation, and VNAV, which is vertical navigation. So what we do is the instrument landing profile is fed into the computer on board. However, the signals that come from the instrument landing system is not being displayed to us.
Correct.
So we've got to figure out a way of doing the same ILS, following the same ILS profile by using different modes. The modes we used here were LNAV and VNAV. So it's basically like simulating ILS approach, which is what we had to do. However, since we are not getting the signals from the ground, it's not going to be as accurate as an ILS. So the LNAV VNAV uses the GPS feed from the aircraft, and it'll bring you close into the runway vicinity, and then again you have to adjust.
So, which is why it's not a precision, it's a
Exactly.
non-precision approach. An LNAV VNAV approach is not something you regularly train on an aircraft as big as this, right? It's something you know exists, but it's not something which is there in the Boeing manual, is it?
No, it's not there, but it's an aid which can be used in case of failures like this. This was a kind of a out of the box situation that we had, and using LNAV VNAV really it paid off in this particular case.
Now, the two of you with us today, there were two co-pilots as well who were on the aircraft, and because it's very long, you share the flying responsibilities. Crew resource management, cockpit resource management, how is that such a critical part of dealing with a situation like this?
I think it's a very important aspect, and we are trained since the beginning. And that day we actually realized that how much it matters. It matters a lot, because it all filters down from the senior most guy to the junior most guy. And here we had Captain Rustam Balia very ably guiding us and taking all our inputs and efforts and all our suggestions. And with him was Captain Vikas, who was ably supporting him. And me
And you were sitting in the back
yes,
over here to my left.
I was always there at your seat.
Yeah.
In fact, almost hounding them. And Captain Bhatti was on my right, and very ably he was coming out with all the details of what all airports we can go to in this present circumstances, and the fuel required and stuff like that, and the time required. And here I was assisting them with all these three of us.
Like I had mentioned earlier, he was like a hawk over my shoulder, just monitoring every single
Was he a backseat driver?
No, I wouldn't say that, because at a crucial time like this, the inputs that you get with another set of eyes is invaluable.
And especially when the ATC said that, okay, I can't do anything better than this. We were like all four of us looking at each other and then kind of sorting out the matter. And that's where I think this CRM comes very handy.
Now, in a situation like this, when you've got multiple failures, and we can't show it over here right now because we are talking to one another, this entire cockpit would be blaring with sounds, and there would be a bunch of lights going on, quite distracting. I mean, it's meant to actually alert you to something wrong. How does your training help you to focus on the task ahead, understand what these warnings are, put it away, and get the job done?
It's basically you view it from this perspective where you understand that you're facing a problem, and the problem needs to be solved, and that is, and all focus and attention has to just be on the problem. So if you've got like we had config warnings, which are red warnings, like we call them.
Anything
They
which is
are not
unusual about configuration.
Yeah.
Whatever happens about configuration, if it's not going correct, then we'll have a configuration warning. That's what he is.
It's a warning where you're supposed to act. You're not supposed to think. So it is very distracting, because the warning is designed in such a way that you act at that point. You do not think.
Yeah.
If it tells you, if it gives you a gear config warning, you have to act and put the gear down.
Right.
You're not supposed to think
Yeah.
at that point. But when this warning is coming, when it's not supposed to come, it is very, very distracting at that point. But you have to just shut it out. You have to just, completely shut it out. And like my, and at least on the first approach, that's what my first officer was doing, because it's so distracting to us.
Yeah.
To everyone here, he was just trying to silence the warning. We were telling him silence the warning. He at the same time also has to make sure that suppose there's an actual warning and it's something different from this, he has to make sure that he's not cancelling the wrong warning.
Yeah.
Because then we're going to be even in more trouble.
Right.
It goes back to the first principles that you learn in flying school, which is first you aviate, then you navigate, and then you communicate. So that priority has to be really there, because if you're going to miss out and you're going to start bothering about ATC and communications and stuff like that and forget about aviating, your aircraft is going to be all over the place.
The flight path is the priority.
So, you got to keep that aircraft first in control, then you've got to make sure it's going where you want it to go, and then you can communicate, then you can tell ATC, that this is going on. We had just, we had about maybe 2 or 3 minutes to do that before we executed the go-around. So at that point in time, ATC is not that crucial, because he can always be told, that we've gone around. But it's more important to keep that aircraft safe. Also, our traffic collision avoidance system, that's TCAS, was not working in a busy airspace like that. The last thing you need is,
Get into some other traffic.
So and we don't get any indication of that.
Okay, last couple of questions to both of you. To you first, Captain. What does it feel like? What did it feel like when you actually finished this entire landing, this entire procedure? Did it actually seep in what went through, or were you still so focused in your mind that it took some time for it all to settle down?
I actually, when we shut down, we actually requested for 4 cups of real strong coffee, because we were looking at each other and we were like, okay, smiling at each other. He looked back and he said, okay, finally we made it. And that was kind of a euphoria. And the caffeine added to that, and we needed that. And
how about you? When did it strike you that did I just go through that?
No, I think for me, it was the whole shutdown process. And now what? Because our hands were still full with getting stuff, because now we've diverted to another airport. We have ground crew coming on board. We had the engineer down there. The auxiliary power unit, that's our APU, was not functioning. So they had to connect ground power. But before they could connect the ground power, we had to keep the engine running. Otherwise, everything is going to go dead.
So your job didn't quite end.
No, mine didn't end. Mine really didn't end.
When did it end? When did it actually seep in? When did the gravity of the situation, in hindsight, start kicking in?
In hindsight, I think it started when we all
actually. For a coffee.
No. My thing was not done at that point, because we were talking to the company. We were getting all the formalities done. The paperwork is very important after something like this. All that has to be taken care of. So really, there was no time for all that. I think for all of us together, it sunk in when we were in the transport and heading back
to the hotel over there.
Yeah. And that was a few hours later. But
was there any hand shivering or anything like that?
No,
or
not really. In fact,
that?
These guys were fantastic sitting in the front. They were fantastic.
I must say, in hearing that communication, the ATC communication, you guys were so calm. I mean, there was not an iota of panic, nothing of the sort. It's amazing. I know you're trained for that, and I know that's your answer. Well, we are trained for that. But you're human at the end of the day. I mean, how do you actually manage to do that?
Perhaps the team made all the difference. All 4 of us together, working for last 15 hours together. I think the bonding mattered. The kind of vibes mattered, and looking at each other and kind of we got strength from each other, and I think everything went well because of that.
Yeah, and like you said, I'm going back to the training part, but it's again you're kind of trained to solve a problem. So here there is a problem. We are facing a problem, so we need to focus on that problem and basically just get this aircraft down.
There was no time to panic.
There was no time to panic. There was, it all happened. I think it was all of
38 seconds. That's
38 minutes from the time we carried out that go around till the time we actually landed into Newark was all of 38 minutes. So
15-hour plus flight ended up being what in 38 minutes. It was it was
it
essentially boiled down to that.
Yeah.
All right. I'm not going to exaggerate and say life and death or whatever it was, because all of you are professional. And I'd like to thank you, Captain, very much for being with us.
Thank you.
And thank you very much as well,
Thanks.
Captain.
Thank you.
It's been wonderful speaking to you and you know, getting an idea of what the job is all about. Thank you so much, and congratulations to the entire team. And you know, having to deal with hundreds of those passengers in the back, looking out for their safety and dealing with all of those things. Well, that gives you a real idea of what the crew of AI 101 on September 11th had to go through. And I'll summarize it once. Bad weather, low fuel, multiple cockpit instrumentation problems and failures. And quick decision making is what they needed to do to get the giant Boeing 777 airliner on the ground safely. They're here talking to us and sharing a little bit about what it means to be a pilot. It's these critical moments that they spent a lifetime training on.